Welcome to The Critique. The material submitted today explores a pilot randomized controlled trial on frequency-specific microcurrent therapy for adults with clinical distress. Let's get right into it.
This is a really fascinating submission. I mean, it's right at that intersection of psychology and, well, biophysics. And the pilot data is genuinely promising.
It is, especially the speed of relief.
Yes. It suggests this idea of healing through frequency modulation isn't just theory, it's a measurable thing. So to get this from a pilot to a definitive RCT, we have to make sure the methodology is as sophisticated as the claim.
I agree. So that early physical response seems to be the main finding, right? The FSM groups reporting fewer somatic symptoms and negative emotions than relaxation after just 6 sessions. That's where we'll start.
Okay, so here's the core of it for me. To move from a promising pilot, which relies so heavily on self-report, to a scientifically unimpeachable definitive RCT, future studies just have to integrate robust, objective, physiological biomarkers.
A crucial distinction. The pilot's whole argument, as I see it, is that FSM works by influencing the autonomic nervous system. It pulls people out of that sympathetic fight-or-flight state.
Precisely. And my main concern is that the pilot relies on things like the PHQ-15 for somatic symptoms, the AHDS for anxiety. These are good clinical tools, but the why, the actual mechanism, is just inferred, not proven.
So the intervention is physical, the frequency modulation, but the evidence isn't.
Exactly. Without objective data on the nervous system, you run the risk of, well, people could say it's just expectation bias, especially since the study wasn't blinded.
Which is exactly what you need to neutralize in a definitive trial. But, adding biomarkers, that adds a lot of complexity.
And cost. Is it really worth it?
Oh, 100%. It completely transforms the study. You go from a trial where we know that FSM works to one where we know how and why it works.
So the suggestion is pretty straightforward. Incorporate measurable biological indicators.
Okay, let's get specific then. What biomarkers would give the most direct window into the ANS and the stress response?
3 stand out for me. First, you have to look at cortisol levels. You'd sample them, say, 4 times a day to track the daily rhythm of the stress hormone. A regulated HPA axis is a really clear sign of distress reduction. Second, and this is probably the most critical one for their claim, is heart rate variability, HRV.
Right, the master key.
It is. It gives you a direct, non-invasive window into vagal tone and parasympathetic activity. It's the definition of the neurobalance they're trying to achieve. And third, because distress is so often tied to inflammation, you have to look at key inflammatory cytokines.
Things like IL-6, TNF-alpha?
Exactly. IL-1, IL-6, TNF-alpha. Other FSM studies on pain have shown frequency can reduce these. Adding these shifts the narrative from participants felt better to we saw verified physiological healing.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So shifting from what to measure to maybe when to measure it, let's talk about pacing. The pilot showed that FSM has quick effects in just 6 sessions on things like perceived stress.
Right. Quicker than relaxation alone.
But the deeper things, like difficulties in emotion regulation on the DERS scale, that took the full 12 sessions to even start moving.
And that difference in response time is incredibly insightful. It tells us FSM is great for the immediate physical and emotional burden, but the cognitive stuff, that's slower to change.
So that brings us to the next point.
Yes. The inherent difference in how quickly these things respond, the body versus the mind, means we need a much more precise, evidence-based session count. You can't just treat all outcomes like they're on the same timeline.
So what's the vulnerability in the pilot's approach to session length then?
The vulnerability is that the design just assumes 12 sessions is enough for everything. But the data shows these complex processes, like emotion regulation or self-efficacy, they only started showing a significant change right at that 12-week mark.
So it might be just barely enough, or not quite enough.
Or not quite enough for a stable, lasting change. We're not just looking for a p-value. We want real therapeutic efficacy.
So how would you structure the definitive trial to really maximize that impact, especially for those cognitive targets?
The suggestion is to design the RCT with conditional or staggered endpoints. You have to optimize the intervention length for these long-term behavioral shifts.
Right, it's like you treat the acute pain first, and then you work on the underlying habit. different timelines. Can you give a couple of concrete examples of how that staggered approach might look?
Sure. So if the main goal of the definitive trial is deep change in something like emotion regulation, you have to accept that 12 weeks is probably just the start. So you could extend the FSM intervention to a maintenance phase, maybe 16, even 20 sessions, to see if the benefits get stronger or just stabilize.
Okay.
Or, here's another idea. You could lean into the fact that the physical symptoms get better so fast. Use the first 6 sessions as a stabilization phase. Get that acute distress down. And then in the second half, you bring in cognitive strategies. You align the therapy with how people actually change.
I like that. That's very elegant. So our third area gets to the heart of the tech itself. The material mentions FSM uses specific frequency pairs for tissue resonance, a rectangular waveform, all that.
Right, the frequency-specific part of frequency-specific microcurrent.
Exactly.
Look, this is about scientific trust. It's about transparency. The theoretical and, frankly, the replicable robustness of FSM depends entirely on explicitly mapping the frequencies used to the biological states they're meant to change.
And what's missing from the pilot that you feel undercuts that claim?
The central issue is they detail the device parameters perfectly. The rectangular wave, 7 volts, the frequency range. They even say the intent is to target neural hyperactivity. But the specific frequency pairs they used, they're just not there.
They're omitted.
Completely. And that's a critical vulnerability. It makes it impossible to tell FSM apart from just generic microcurrent or even a TENS unit. If your claim is frequency specificity, you have to show the frequencies. Without them, no one can replicate your work or even really evaluate it.
It's like a recipe that just says bake a cake, but leaves out the ingredients.
That's a perfect analogy. So the suggestion is really simple. Stop treating the frequencies like a trade secret. Treat them like essential methodological data.
So publish them.
For full transparency, yes. The definitive RCT protocol has to publish the actual frequency pairs they used to target neurohyperactivity and neuroregulation. It's the only way we can actually test the mechanism of biological resonance.
And for concrete examples, how would you frame that in the protocol?
First, you articulate the bioelectrical rationale. Why a rectangular wave? You need to confirm the hypothesis that it's ideal for enhancing cellular responses. And second, and this ties back to our first point, if your good outcomes, like that rapid symptom reduction, align with frequency pairs known to affect biomarkers. For example, say you used 40 Hz and 10 Hz, which other studies link to lower IL-6.
You'd have to highlight that connection.
You have to highlight it. You have to draw a direct line from the frequency you applied to the biological change you expect to see.
Got it. Okay, let's turn to the final area, generalization. The material is very clear that the sample was homogeneous, overwhelmingly women university students. But the big red flag for me was the medication use.
The imbalance. Yes. Huge interpretive obstacle. So to ensure the findings are generalizable beyond this very specific academic group, the definitive RCT has to intentionally address and stratify results based on these other factors.
Why is that 50% medication rate in the FSM-only group compared to much lower in the others such a massive problem?
The weakness is that this difference in psychotropic drug use is a huge, unmanaged confounder. It complicates everything. You can't definitively say the positive results came from the FSM when half that group was also on pharmacological treatment and the control groups weren't.
So you don't know if it's FSM or FSM plus medication.
Right. The data might just be showing that FSM works best with existing pharmacology, not as a standalone.
Don't fix that. The conclusion ends up being, this is great for stressed out, medicated college students, but it won't get adopted for the general population.
Exactly. The impact is severely limited. So the suggestion is twofold. First, you implement stricter criteria in the definitive RCT. You either exclude for concurrent medication use to get a clean signal, or if you can't, you use subgroup analysis to control for the impact of medication on every single outcome.
And what about getting outside that academic bubble?
That's the other part. Since the sample was just university students, the next phase has to expand recruitment to a more diverse population. Working professionals, parents, just general community members with broader life stress. You have to test this against a wider spectrum of human distress to really prove its robustness.
This has been a really insightful look at strengthening this FSM protocol. So let's recap the 4 critical areas.
Let's do it. First, we said it's absolutely necessary to integrate objective physiological biomarkers. HRV, cortisol, cytokines. You have to prove the mechanism.
Right. Move beyond self-report to cement the biophysical claim. Second, we talked about optimizing the protocol length, suggesting staggered or even longer endpoints, up to maybe 20 sessions, for those slower-to-change cognitive outcomes.
Third, for scientific integrity and reproducibility, the protocol must transparently publish the actual frequency pairs. You have to map the input to the biological target.
And finally, we highlighted the need to address that sample specificity, especially by managing the huge medication confounder, to make sure the results are actually generalizable.
The bottom line is, the pilot data is incredibly promising. FSM clearly shows it can provide faster relief than relaxation alone. And implementing these suggestions will make the definitive RCT just maximally robust, scientifically unimpeachable. It's how you build the strongest possible case for healing through frequency modulation.
We look forward to seeing the revised protocol. Please submit your materials back to us once they're developed, and we will offer another constructive critique. Until next time.